Welcome to Remarkable Retail Podcast, Season 8, Episode 12, presented by Salonis. I'm Michael LeBlanc.
And I'm Steve Dennis.
We're staying up late to bring you insights from retailers on the other side of the planet for this special Asia-Pacific episode. Our guests are Ngai Yuen, Group Chief Marketing and Merchandising Officer for Aeon Group Malaysia, who joins us from the capital of Kuala Lumpur, and Reef Quayle, Managing Director for the all-new NRF Retail's Big Show Asia-Pacific, joining us from Sydney.
Yeah, well, we've been making a concerted effort the last bit here to bring more of a global perspective, and this time, we're going to the other side of the world. It's a very interesting conversation, and I'm also going to be out at the NRF APAC event in Singapore in June, so I'm very much looking forward to that. But our listeners will get to hear a bit more about that in just a few minutes.
Yeah, and listeners are going to love our interview with Yuen. We could spend the rest of this episode talking about her diverse and remarkable accomplishments. Award-winning leader with works in entrepreneurship, social activism, media, content building. She founded and runs an NGO, Women, Girls, and produced top-ranked Netflix documentary. Just wow. So you're really going to enjoy this episode, so stay tuned for that. Now, let's talk about accomplishments. You've got a great accomplishment. I think it is your very first published HBR, Harvard Business Review article. Tell us all about it.
Yeah, this was pretty fun. So it's an article that digs into one of the concepts in my new book, Leaders Leap, which is around this idea that safe is often risky. So we'll put a link in the show notes. But yeah, that just came out this past week and is getting quite a lot of interest. So very happy. Been working on that for a while. And
yes,
let's just say the HBR people are pretty picky, not only about what goes in, but even if they decide they want to put it in, there's a fair amount of editing, shall we say, but good advice. So I appreciate all my editors that have helped me over the years.
All right. So speaking of writing and your new book, we've got a virtual launch event coming up April 22nd. Tell the people all about it.
Yeah, that's the Monday before the book is released in the United States. And we're going to have a virtual event where we'll talk a little bit about the book. We'll also have some special guests. Seth Godin is one of them. We'll release a bit more detail next week. But look for more information on social media, but we'll also put a registration link in the show notes. So we hope people will come out and support the launch of Leaders Leap.
It's going to be fun. Let's get, all right, so it's a super big episode, lots of stuff to talk about. We got some great interviews. Let's get right to the news. And as we often like to do, let's start with a wee bit of macroeconomic stuff, because there's some news out that helps inform and layers on top of the NRF. What did you make from the news coming out about consumer spending and some other stuff?
Friday, as we're recording this, we got the core PCE for the U.S., which is really both some indications as to the direction of inflation, but also some information on consumer spending. So the quick highlights on that would be that the PCE came in at about a 2.5% rate, which is more or less what's been expected. And there was a little bit of a revision up of the January number. So what does all this mean? I think it just basically supports this idea that we will be in a higher for longer interest rate environment. So nothing in this report particularly suggested that the Federal Reserve is likely to move with any real alacrity on interest rates anytime soon. The other piece of it, which I think is interesting, and I think we'll need more data to really make sense of it, but consumer spending was actually up quite a lot in the past month, quite a bit above the estimate. But personal income, so basically the amount of money you have to spend on stuff, was softer. So I think the thing to watch out for here as we see consumer spending continuing to be pretty robust, inflation kind of sticky, and personal income not rising quite as much, and consumer debt continuing to rise, is whether we'll get any sort of spending squeeze as we get further into the year. But as I said, I think we need a little bit more data before I would start to make too much of that.
There is as we turn our mind to some retail earnings, there's not a lot. We're not really in retail earnings season. There's a few breadcrumbs or footprints in the sand coming out about that squeeze. Talk about the news out of a couple of retailers who've been chitting and chatting in the media.
Yeah, I figured, we've talked quite a lot about earnings the last few episodes, and I figured we wouldn't go through too much here. We did get some earnings kind of rounding out the season here from RH, the retailer, home furnishings retailer formerly known as Restoration Hardware, GameStop, Walgreens, H&M. I won't talk about each of them in particular, but I think what was interesting about pretty much all of them, and this fits with what we've been talking about the last few weeks with just about every other retailer as well, maybe with the exception of Amazon and Walmart, is that everybody's kind of signaling weakening consumer demand. Now, you've also got issues particular to the home and luxury market. So RH has been fighting headwinds there for several quarters. GameStop, I think, there's a lot of questions about the long-term solidity of that business model. Walgreens, big write-off. Some of their forays into health services haven't gone where they expected to. But I think, to me, the headline is just everybody seems, or just about everybody seems to be relatively cautious about the balance of the year. So, yeah, we'll see how that plays out.
It's interesting because there's some moves, and you mentioned H&M. They announced they're turning their minds back to stores, which is super interesting. They're going to refurbish 250 stores, and about 4 years ago they kind of pulled back from their stores, and now they're getting, they wanted to focus on e-com, and now they've got more religion, so to speak, about their stores. And interestingly, I don't know if you heard this, but talk about, I could see some acquisitions. Word on the street is LVMH is looking at Glossier. We're going to talk about a Home Depot acquisition. So people are making moves, right? It's interesting. They see what's happening in the short term, but their eyes are fixed on the long term. So some super, super interesting stuff.
Yeah, I think just on that, and maybe jump ahead to one of the stories we were going to talk about. We talked about I talked about in my predictions, lots of these different aspects of bifurcation. There, that word is again. And I think even with the slowing that we seem to be seeing, if you're a strong retailer, you got a great balance sheet, it could be a really good opportunity to make some of those moves. So, for example, the Home Depot just announced a very big deal, $18 billion to acquire SRS Distribution, which is actually just their headquarters just a few miles away from where I live. So that news got a lot of play here in the DFW area. This company is a building materials supplier, particularly roofing. So this is Home Depot really doubling down on their already strong position serving the professional community. I think it's close to 50% of their customers are pros versus DIYers. So yeah, I think we'll there's some rumors as well. This isn't so much from a strong balance sheet perspective, but supposedly the Neiman Sachs deal is heating up again. So yeah, I expect we'll see a fair amount of activity, a lot of consolidation as the year goes on.
All right, let's speak of investments. Let's talk about Amazon. They put $2.75 billion into Anthropic, and tell us all about Anthropic because they are that's attracting obviously a lot of attention, and they work in the AI space. So tell us all about what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I think we touched on the first investment that Amazon made in Anthropic, which was $1.25 billion sometime last year. I don't remember exactly, but Anthropic is one of the actually quite sizable at this point AI-focused firms. So they don't get quite as much attention as OpenAI does or some of the efforts going on at Google and Microsoft and others. But they're now allegedly valued at north of $18 billion. So I think this is, number one, it's Amazon's most significant venture-style investment. Acquiring Whole Foods was a bigger check, but in terms of things to really support their technology, and it's just it's kind of an arms race, I think, for many of these firms to participate in AI. And then the other thing, which is kind of related but not completely, is Amazon also announced they're going to spend, and I had to check this number several times.
I did the same thing. I'm like, can that be right?
Yeah, $150 billion on data centers. Now that is over the next 15 years, so it's a paltry $10 billion a year.
Yeah. But that makes that's a lot more reasonable.
And it's basically to support its technology and in particular its cloud computing edge. Now, of course, AI relies heavily on massive computing power, so this is not unrelated, but also to support more broadly their customers and their retail business. So a lot of moves going on at Amazon.
Geez, these two arm races, right? One in AI and then one in the cloud computing versus Google and Microsoft, the three horsemen there. Whew. Wow. Now let's talk about, we've mentioned this before. I spent a lot of time actually thinking about it, focusing on Ozempic and GLP-1 drugs and their impact on food and consumption and brands and QSR. Now we got some news that's just fascinating out of Unilever.
We may not be able to tie this precisely together, but Unilever, and this was actually, I meant to talk about it last week because it's a little bit old news now, but Unilever, huge CPG company, announced they were divesting their position in ice cream. They own quite a few different ice cream brands, including Ben & Jerry's, so that's among the smallest one. And I've seen some people tie this to what some have referred to as the potential Ozempic apocalypse or Ozempic recession or what have you, because as these GLP-1 drugs become more and more popular, and perhaps as they get insurance coverage and the prices start to come down, and there's other drugs in the pipeline, this could have a very significant effect on certain retailers and certain CPG brands because of the appetite suppression. So I think it's an interesting thing to watch. We've seen a few companies basically say, it's not going to be a big deal. But in Unilever's case, there is some suspicion that they didn't like the long-term prospects for the ice cream business, partially or maybe largely due to the GLP-1 drugs. And then, on the other end of the spectrum, in terms of what's going on with fat, we have Krispy Kreme and McDonald's cozying up even more. They were already, McDonald's was already testing selling Krispy Kreme donuts starting in late 2022, I believe it is. But they announced that they're expanding their partnership so that Krispy Kreme will be available to all locations by the end of 2026. Now, I was particularly, aside from liking Krispy Kremes myself, I was particularly interested in this because I got to meet Patrick McIntyre, the head of development for Krispy Kreme, because he was on my panel at Shop Talk, and I was really quite impressed by him, but some of the things going on at Krispy Kreme. I imagine he knew this was about to happen, but he didn't let me in on any little secrets. But it's actually quite fascinating, the whole distribution system they have set up to serve their own restaurants, but to serve all these partnerships. So that will be a big deal for them, but perhaps will help fuel the sales of GLP-1 drugs as the expansion takes hold.
All right, well, we got a lot of show left to go. Now, first, our interview with Remarkable Yuen, a few words from the NRF Big Show Asia Pacific MD, Managing Director, Reef. Now, a quick note to the listeners. This episode features sponsored content. The NRF Big Show Asia Pacific folks asked us to help raise awareness for this event. Doesn't in any way take away, for sure, from the quality of our interview from Yuen. Fascinating interview. We were a real treat to speak with her. But we wanted to let everybody know that this is what we were about on this episode. Now, first, a few words from our presenting sponsor, Celonis. Want to ramp up speed and productivity for your entire retail operation? In the Celonis Process Mining for Dummies Handbook, we show you how Celonis process mining technology, enhanced with process intelligent AI, can help you streamline performance across your entire retail business so you can drive lasting value from end to end. That means purchasing, supply chain, omni-channel execution, merchandising, and customer service processes, all managed and optimized through one powerful software solution. To get your free copy of Process Mining for Dummies and see how it's generated millions in value for brands around the world like Aldi, Globus, and Edeka, head to celonis.com/remarkable-retail. Yuen, thank you so much for joining us here on the Remarkable Retail podcast. How are you doing this morning?
I'm good. I'm excited to have this conversation. So, yeah.
Fantastic. Well, it is morning where you are. It is evening where Steve and I are. Where do we find you sitting this morning?
Right in the middle of Kuala Lumpur, the city center of Malaysia. And it's really interesting because our head office is actually in the car park of the mall that we own. So it's quite a treasure hunt to come look for us. But once you find us, we're really nice people.
Well, like I said, thanks so much for joining us. We're really looking forward to the conversation, learning about you, learning about your business, and learning about how you look at retail. Let's start by telling us about yourself. Who are you, and And you have such an interesting background in media and entertainment, but you also are a very accomplished retailer. We don't often say that to people that we interview. That's a super interesting mix. So tell us a little bit about your personal and professional journey and what you do for a living.
So I think it all falls back on the principle of my life, which is never say no. So because I never say no, a lot of doors are open, and I get to really do 110% in many things that comes my way. So yes, while I studied biology and chemistry in university, I then went into media, and in media, it's a variety, right? I've done radio, I've done theater, I've done television, I've done film, both behind the scene as well as hosting it in front. So I've been one of the really rare few that really got around to doing as many things as possible, because I say, just bring it on. And when the opportunity comes along and say, hey, do you want to, drive retail, because we wanted to understand how you got the audience, for film, for television, for radio. I'm like, yeah, it's still an audience, even though they do different things. But I'm definitely intrigued, and I say yes. So I jumped into Carrefour back then for Malaysia and Singapore, and I was marketing and comm director. And we drove a lot of initiatives that were like some of the first back then. And so when Carrefour was sold to Aeon in 2012, I took a 10 years break, and I was running a couple of NGOs. And these NGOs are in the space of technology, in the space of the arts, and in the space of women and girls. So again, I got to sample a lot of different things. I got to understand a lot of what truly matter in making choices, in understanding how people relate to one another and relate to things that's happening around them and relate in relationship. And those things do form the way I look at things, given the role that I'm playing today, which is at Aeon, the Group Chief Merchandise and Marketing Officer.
Really quite fascinating. I mean, it's really quite fascinating. I mean, when you think about, if they looked at you and said, let's bring in someone who understands how to reach people, do you think, the key skill that you brought forward into your jobs today from your past? Did that hold true, in other words?
I think what they're not saying, what they're seeing, but they're not able to say, because perhaps they don't see many of the same personality like this walking around, right? People who are really open to new ways of doing things, but can then relate so well to how it is today and the legacy that is, and moving that along. So I guess the short term for what I've just described is called transformation. But, transformation sounds like a really big word too. What is that, right? So the ability of really understanding how much needs to be transformed, how much change is necessary at any one point, because who else cannot take this anymore? And where is the breaking point? What do we do? Because is this enough for the customers? Now someone needs to do that.
Let's talk about the business. As I look at it and try to understand it, it's general merchandise and some kind of mass merchandise and also grocery. So describe the business. It's been around a long time by the looks of things, and where and how you win in the marketplace.
Yeah, so Aeon is a Japanese retailer. We're pretty big in Japan itself. We have more than 200 malls, more than almost 600 plus different doors, and then we've got different formats as well. With convenience store, with organic, we've got it's like all kinds of format, from drugstore to a lot of different kind of retail under the Aeon Group. And then there's also financial services, there's also the banking, there's also a lot of different things. Now, in Malaysia, we were invited by the government in terms of expertise. The Aeon brand is invited. It used to be Just Go before, to come into Malaysia to sort of modernized the retail segment in this country back in 1984. And so that's what happened 40 years ago. This retailer started in Malaysia. And today we have like 28 malls, and that's just for Aeon Mall, not counting the Aeon Bake, which is hypermarket. Then we have got the drugstores, we've got the flat price stores, we've got departmental stores, we've got neighborhood community stores. We all kinds of different format, serving from fresh food, grocery, delicatessen, bakery, to fashion, apparel, kids' needs, babies' needs, home needs, soft and hard. So we will have your, all your furnitures, the main basic furnitures, and then we'll have your curtain and your bedding, electrical items for your home, all that under Aeon.
Well,
that's what I do. All the merchandise and all the marketing for them.
Well, that's quite a big and impressive remit. I'm curious if you could describe a little bit for our listeners, what is it that makes Aeon remarkable? How has the company or set of brands evolved, and how do you make sure that you stay intensely relevant and differentiated and serve customers in a really powerful and remarkable way?
I think the advantage we had was that we were one of the earliest modern retailer here in the country. And because of that, we define a lot of habits, a lot of consumers' habits. And those are perhaps our parents' habits, for example, like people who grew up with us over time pick up the same habit because they shop with their parents or their grandparents in our mall, in our stores. And over time, what we then need to do and focus on is how to build on that relationship. So which means our biggest advantage is that we already started with a great relationship with customers. Now, how do we build on that? So that's really, really the good news. Then the hard work comes in, right? How do we make sure that we are always in the picture? We may not be relevant to some age group, for example, simply because of the phase in your life that this group are in. So, for example, if you're a university-going student and you don't want to walk the distance of maybe say 1 kilometer or 2 kilometers, for your entire journey of just buying, a single loaf of bread, for example, then that's something that you may just want to go pick that up in a convenience store. So then we lose you because then you don't come in until perhaps when you have to do a party or when you are entertaining or when you got married. That could be like 10 years later. So how do we still remain relevant to you? How do we, meanwhile, in the 10 years that we may be missing you, how do we make sure you pop by as much as you can? How do we make sure that you still have some form of connection with us so we don't lose you completely? Those are the things that we continuously do so that we're not lost.
Do you leverage much consumer research or customer insight to drive the business?
Yes, definitely. And of course, because we're very lucky, we're very fortunate to hold the trust with our customers and through our loyalty program. It's one of the earliest, and we're still very active. Customers understand our loyalty quite a fair bit. And because of that, we know most of our customers quite well. We understand them. And what then we need to layer and add on top would be, what else are they doing that is not anywhere part of the touch points with us? So that's what we need to understand. And those are how we understand our customers better with, the different kind of research from different companies that are not necessarily a part of our ecosystem.
So we got connected to you through our friends at Retail's big show, the Asia Pacific show, which will be coming up in June in Singapore. I know I am very, very excited to come to Singapore to participate. But just in general, even though we have a global audience, frankly, we don't have that big an audience throughout Asia. And maybe you could just hit on what you think some of the interesting challenges or trends or opportunities in the broader Asian retail market look like.
I think one of my colleagues from Aeon Japan will be talking about the private label. So that's going to be exciting. I think developing products that is ahead of its curve. Consumers don't know this is a need until we develop them. And that's really an interesting conversation, but it's not every day that you get to develop something like that. And then what are the key conversations that's changing in terms of consumers' habits? Those are things that we're very big on also. So we hope to be able to discuss that. And also, how do we increase touch points? That's important.
Yeah, that seems to be a challenge just about everywhere in the world. Maybe a slight shift. One of the things that we are exploring, and I would say a little bit more depth in our 8th season of this podcast, is the role of leadership. Obviously, leadership is always important, but I think as change accelerates and as retail gets more complex, leadership, particularly transformational leadership, is particularly important. You've obviously had a tremendous amount of success. How would you describe your leadership style and perhaps maybe even some lessons that you've picked up maybe through both success and some failures or less than optimal outcomes that our audience might benefit from?
I definitely need to make sure that it is very clear that success do not happen without failures. And therefore, for success to happen, you kind of need to have maybe, say, 10 failures before one success. And what does that mean is like every time you're near failure or every time you think it's not working, you got to kind of pivot. It's very much like a startup model. Things are not working, so change it until it works. So you never really need to, bury yourself in complete failure, because as long as you keep changing, that same thing that you thought you're going to fall down for is the one thing that's going to lift you so high. So I would never worry about failures. The whole point of it, of anything actually, is just about the act itself. The ability to execute, the ability to make sure that we are following up how we're executing and pivoting along the way, make small changes until it fits, okay, this is the best it can be, and let's focus somewhere else that's going to make this piece better. Now, I think my style is a little bit more empowering. I like to empower the team to do as much as they think they can. But before that, we need to make sure we give them the tool and the ability to be supported when they need to and to be exposed. So technology is actually really important. They need to understand what are the tools that's already being used outside, that are being used by more lean companies, by companies that just started, say, yesterday, because they can build from scratch, right? And we don't. We have a huge legacy system. And how do we maximize the system that we have with the nimbleness that we may not have? So how do we go about that? And how do we make sure that we can still be very light in executing our work, and make sure that we satisfy. So with my team, I think I do give them quite a fair bit of room to explore things. And if you ever hear that, oh my God, Yuen, she's like this BITCH that is so strict, it's also probably true, because it will
Both
come to a point when
time.
I'll be like, hey, you're trying too many things that's not working. Can we just be focused and let's do this so that you can understand what the doing perhaps can look like if you aren't sure. And it's okay that you aren't sure, because the most important thing today is to test and try. And the customers appreciate that too. As long as they know you're testing and you're trying, they're not going to fault you. They will walk this journey with you if you let them in.
It's so interesting as I reflect on a couple of things that you've been talking about. Your just DNA is innovation and looking at issues and problems from different angles. And I'm also struck by what must be a very wide range of competitors, because you are in so many categories. So you've got to keep a lot of eyes on a lot of different people. And then just what you were saying about innovation and retail. Now, how do you balance let's say you were brought in to modernize retail, as you said. So how do you balance the traditional business model? I mean, even if we talked about, cash flow and sales per square foot and emerging technology, how do you know, and maybe we don't, how you're not chasing a rainbow as opposed to a technology that has a legitimate business building or customer service opportunity?
Well, you're right. We don't know. And I guess you will never know unless you do something about it, right? We still don't know if what we're doing ultimately is what we'll end up at. And we don't even know when that... It's not about where we're going to end up with, because then you've got to define the when, you've got to define the what. So perhaps the idea here then is to really focus on the journey and the process itself, and not forgetting that the journey and the process itself is together with the customers. It's not that we are just doing something and then at the end of it show them. That's not how it works. They kind of need to be a part of your process so that you're constantly informed and constantly thinking about, hey, from the point of view of the customers, if we do this, what should we prioritize? Because if you ask this question from the point of view of a retailer, then they will talk about productivity, they will talk about cost saving, they will talk about resources. But if you talk from the point of view of the customers, then you're a little bit, you're so much more specific, because everyone is a customer. Everyone who's working is a customer. Everyone with the company is a customer. So they understand where you're going. And then suddenly it becomes more clear. So technology or not, the whole idea is, what does it do for the customer? If it makes our job faster, if it makes our job easier, can the customer feel and see that? Can the customer really be able to experience something better? So that is actually more important a question than, this is going to be able to save us more money. So that's how, when I have to make a decision, it's always back to look, what is the customer getting out of this? If we're able to save and we can pass the savings on back to them, very good. If you're just saying we're saving, full stop, and so what?
It has to be relevant and compelling at the same time. It kind of has to tick a lot of boxes, so to speak. Where do you find that spark of inspiration to decide? There's so many things, no matter how big your organization is, you do have finite resources. The whiteboard in your office can't be endless. You've got to pick some spots. Do you pick up some breadcrumbs from the loyalty program, from customers? Like, you've got a menu in front of you of all kinds of things, from metaverse to whatever. What inspires you to pick one to start with? Where do you start in that process?
I think people always think you got to start somewhere. I think, but the truth of the matter is that you come in from maybe anywhere and nowhere, and you got to start, right? So it's really not just at any one time one thing. It's really at any one time, maybe 100 things. And you got to trust to be open enough to let as many things go and try. The idea really
do you go to trade shows? Do you go to trade shows, perhaps?
We definitely do. But the best place to be inspired, is on the sales floor. And then you go to a trade show, and then you see something that's going to, this is really good. For that problem I saw on the sales floor the other day, I saw it on this consumer, and and this customer, and they were having this problem trying to locate this product. And we don't have what it takes to help them do this. And then you go to a trade show and voila, I know it. This is a perfect fit. But you can't do one without the other. It's not going to work.
Yeah, I think trying to really, really understand what your customer wants and then being able to anticipate, that's such a core skill these days. But so maybe just as we move to wrapping up, Yuen, could you share a little bit about kind of what's on your short list? What are you most excited about for 2024 and beyond? Or what are some of the growth plans you have that you're able to share with a wider audience?
Yeah, so I'm really excited about how, despite the fact that we're called general merchandise store, which really to the normal customers, consumer, they don't understand that. They just know when they come to us, they will get as much of their needs fulfilled. For me, despite being a GMS, a general merchandise store, like I said earlier, it's really about community building. So it's really about finding the needs that we're able to fulfill for a group of people who came together and were doing something. So, for example, recently we built a brand for functional apparel called Stats, and we worked on the design, the concept with Indonesia's designer. And then when we launch it here in Malaysia, we launch it very specifically with the communities that are very much about outdoor living, about living in the nature, about taking hikes, traveling, about going outbound, really living it up in terms of being a part of the bigger world, and not just the feeling of freedom. So that's what we did. And the community that we have garnered and built and rallied around has been such a great source of inspiration that we want to do this for more different communities. We want to be able to make sure that we're able to serve as many communities as possible, but the ability to define this community sometimes can be tricky and can be the most difficult thing about what we're trying to do.
Well, thanks so much for joining us. I've definitely enjoyed learning more about the Aeon Group. I'm looking forward, as I said earlier, to coming to Singapore to Retail's Big Show Asia Pacific.
Yeah, we must catch up in person.
Very much looking forward to that. But thanks for educating our audience a bit more about your company, but I think even more importantly about how you approach some of the challenges in retail and your leadership style. So thanks for joining Michael and I on the Remarkable
Retail
my pleasure. Podcast.
Thank you.
Well, welcome to the podcast. Reef coming to us all the way from Australia. Thanks for joining us on the podcast. How are you? I guess it's your morning, our evening.
It is. It's not too bad. It's 11:30 in the morning, so I could sleep in this morning. So thanks for that, Steve.
All right. Well, we like you to be well rested, but it's great to have you on. And I wonder if you might just take 30 seconds or so to tell our listeners a little bit about your background and what it is you currently do for a living, which will get us to why you are visiting us briefly on the podcast.
Thank you, Steve. My background is a bit wide and varied. I've had about a quarter of a century. I feel old now. In the digital media, marketing, and retail e-commerce space, both in agencies, working with clients, in professional services, and finally over the last sort of decade or so, working on the business rather than in the business, running events. Currently, I've been in my current role. I've been with a company called Comexposium. I'm in my 7th year. Comexposium is a French trade show and exhibition company, a large event organizer. And until at the start of this year, I have been running the iMedia portfolio across marketing, media, and retail e-commerce. But as of the 1st of January this year, I became Managing Director of NRF Retail's Big Show Asia Pacific.
As an incredible coincidence, that might be what we're about to talk to you about. So I imagine that pretty much all our listeners are familiar with the NRF Big Show in New York, but now there is this new event that you just mentioned, the Retail's Big Show in Asia Pacific. So could you tell us a little bit about the impetus for this event and maybe a bit about what folks might expect if they are to make the journey to Singapore to enjoy the event?
Absolutely. We, as many of your listeners might know, the NRF, the Big Show in New York is now, this year is actually 113 years old. And so there was a real ambition by Matt Shea, the president, to globalise this show and take this show outside of the US. And the impetus around that really was where to go next and why here and why now. And Asia Pacific became pretty much the obvious choice. It's the largest retail marketplace in the world. Almost 60% of region of the global e-commerce shoppers sit in this region. But what's really driving this market is just its incredible growth. Between 2020 and 2030, according to Colliers, we're going to see about 3.49 billion people join the middle class in the Asia-Pacific region. That's a 73% increase. And so you can imagine with such growth of wealth in the region, retail is just exploding. And when there's even though around the world sort of markets have been flat from a retail point of view, the demand for consumer goods, even from 23 to 24, is continuing to grow in this region. So with that background context, it was really exciting to say, well, okay, we're going to bring this show to Singapore and make it a pan-regional Asia-Pacific show. From a terms of what people can expect, this show is going to be, obviously, in our first iteration, the inaugural year, we won't be obviously as large as the big show, but we'll still be pretty substantial. So we're expecting 5,000 or 6,000 people through the Marina Bay Sands. We'll run a conference and a trade show, very similar to what you see in New York, with about 2,000 through the conference and about 5,000 to 6,000 through the site in totality. So it's an opportunity to do something pretty special in this region. The context, the reason why we ended in Singapore is that Singapore and I'm based in Australia too, for that matter. Singapore is just the obvious choice because it's such a great hub for the region. It has incredible infrastructure and it's really progressive, forward-thinking government and agencies around it, which really have enabled us to really accelerate and ramp up a show quite quickly. In terms of what to expect, I think for me, the most exciting thing is not just some great content and some great solution providers, as you'd expect from the big show, but the ability to bring the top minds in retail together. And what's exciting is that you can be an Australian retailer, a Malaysian retailer, or a Japanese retailer, and meet great peers and colleagues from the region. I think that's the most exciting, and what will be the most exciting thing for retailers when they come to this show.
Reith, one of the things about conferences is content planning, the trade craft, and there's so much, as you say, going on in retail. There's so much growth going on in Asia Pacific. How are you thinking about the content? Who's helping you? Do you have an advisory board? And as you kind of create the content and sessions, what's jumping out at you? What are you excited about, and what's that process and outcome look like?
That's a great question. And when I started the process of thinking about the content for this show, the task was really quite daunting. And the reason for that is, so we're dealing with a really large market, but we're not dealing with an homogenous market. This market is incredibly diverse, from geography to payments to legislative context. It's all incredibly different. So what I did was I formed an advisory board of about 20 to 25 retail leaders from Mumbai to Tokyo down to Auckland. And the reason I did that was to conduct about 25 interviews and also have some feedback from the group to understand the themes and topics that were consistent throughout the region. So that was the thing, because for me, if we were going to program this show and do it well, our speakers needed to understand their context and understand what were those sort of big, beachhead topics which were common to all, or common to retailers who, no matter where they were sitting in the region. Yeah, so that, just to give you some background, there's 11 big topics. And I can, if you would like me to go through them, I can now. But your top three for me, probably
give me the top three.
Top three. Okay, cool. Yeah. I think the number one is, in no particular order, AI. I think AI and machine learning. And that, within AI, it feeds into first-party data. It feeds into, operations. It feeds into sustainability. There's a whole bunch of things within AI that make in retail that are really transforming the landscape. AI is interesting because there's no killer app use cases at the stage in retail, but there are things that are happening which are making incremental improvements to retail businesses. Probably the second thing is really around customer experience. And I think what we're seeing now is there's no longer discrete digital and physical channels anymore. In fact, customers are looking for one branded retail experience where quite often they don't actually remember where the transaction takes place. So it ladders up a whole bunch of stuff in there. But I think for me, the ability of a customer to really enjoy a physical retail experience that's crazily enhanced by the way that they're managed in a digital context and vice versa is pretty impressive. And I think some of the best retailers in the region are really demonstrating that. I think you can see it within, say, for example, within grocery around the region, there's been some pretty incredible things happening. Probably the last thing which I'll call out, which for me, it doesn't seem like a surprise, but it was for me through this process. In the past, ethical and sustainable practices have not been big topics for enterprise retail. They've been driven by primarily a vocal consumer group or a fast-growing, charismatic founder of a scale-up retailer with a purpose. But this year in the advice board we ran, what was common to all was sustainable and responsible practices in sourcing, in all facets of operations of retail has become common, and that's the first time I've seen it called out collectively, both either within domestic shows or within a regional show. So that's probably the piece, the AI piece, and the hot technology piece, and where that's going. The customer experience piece and how all the elements build together to deliver a great experience, and finally, ethical and sustainable practices.
Fantastic. Action-packed, 8 more tracks of fantastic content, no doubt. Now, give us all the details. You mentioned it's in Singapore. Tell us where folks can go to learn more, see the rest of the content, all the roster of great speakers, when, where, and how do they learn more, and where do they go?
Okay, cool. The show is on the 11th to the 13th of June at the Marina Bay Sands Convention Centre in Singapore. It's a fantastic venue, actually. It's when I say Singapore has fantastic venues, it is an amazing venue. Quite blessed to be and quite grateful to be in that venue. In terms of, if you'd like to find out more, our website is nrfbigshowapac.nrf.com. So nrfbigshowapac.nrf.com. And if you just Google search NRF APAC, we'll come up on Google or Bing.
Reece, thanks so much for joining Steve and I on the mic here at the Remarkable Retail Podcast. Love what you're doing. What a great opportunity. As you say, that part of the world, very exciting, tremendous growth, lots to learn from, and I'm sure lots for everyone to learn from each other. So once again, thanks for joining us on Remarkable Retail Podcast. I wish you continued success and a amazing start to what no doubt will be a conference that will be long remembered and will be one of those first ones that will be first of many. So thanks again for joining us.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Michael. It's been a great opportunity to speak to you today. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in. New episodes of Season 8 presented by Celonis will show up every Tuesday. So be sure to tell your friends and colleagues in the retail industry all about us.
I'm Steve Dennis, author of the best-selling book, Remarkable Retail, and my new forthcoming book, Leaders Leap, Transforming Your Company at the Speed of Disruption, which will be published in April and is available for pre-order at booksellers everywhere. You can learn more about me, my consulting, and keynote speaking at stephenpdennis.com.
I'm Michael LeBlanc, consumer retail growth consultant, keynote speaker, producer, and host of a series of retail trade podcasts, including this one. You can learn more about me on LinkedIn. Safe travels, everyone.